I'm here at Shirley 40 with Michael and Denise Okuda, graphic artists and designers. Thank you for speaking with me.
Oh, thank you for having us.
So let me start by asking, how did you get into this business?
Well, I actually got into the business because I grew up in Hawaii, and I was working on very low budget television commercials, and I was working on community theater and corporate graphics. Then after the Star Trek the motion picture came out, I just being a fan for life, I was doing sketches about what I thought the control panel should be. I sent some sketches into to the production office at Paramount Pictures, and I was delighted that I got a phone call back from Ralph Winter, who was associate producer on Star Trek 3, and he said, well, we're making Star Trek 3, but we're already staffed up. But if we ever do a Star Trek 4, I'll give you a call. And I thought, wow, it's the nicest brush off you'll ever get.
Yeah. And
to my utter shock, 2 years later, Ralph, in fact, gave me a call. He said, hey, we're making Star Trek 4. Do you want to work on it? And, of course, he didn't have to ask twice.
Right. Okay. And did you get into
I have kind of an unusual story in the fact that this was not my first profession, as I was a registered nurse. And I actually came up, some people in the early production of TNG knew that I was a nurse, knew that I liked Star Trek, and said, can you come up and talk to the production designer, Herman Zimmerman, and spoke with two illustrators, senior illustrator Andy Probert and illustrator Rick Sternbeck, about how I would like to see the sickbay of the future. And I was taken up to the art department and saw this little figurine of Max Headroom, and the television series Max Headroom was brilliant. It was way before its time. And I said, who owns this figurine of Max Headroom? And it was Mike. And we started chatting. One thing led to another, and Mike was working on Star Trek 5, the feature Star Trek 5, and if I wanted to see him, I had to come up to the studio on the weekends. And he started teaching me how to do backlit graphics and so forth, and so I started helping out. And then Herman hired me to work on Star Trek 6 and then Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
So, Michael, once you got this big break with Star Trek, did it change your approach to how you did your work, or?
Well, one of the things I learned is that all production, whether it's a low-budget local television commercial or a community theater or a big feature film for Hollywood, it's all fundamentally the same sort of thing. It's you're always the actual work certainly changes, but the approach, that is, you look at the resources, you look at what the producers want to do in terms of storytelling, you look at the styles, and you try to find out what's the best compromise between all of the different conflicting needs. There's always you want to make this bigger, but it can't be too big because you have to be able to move this out of the way between shots. You want this to be brighter, but it can't be too bright because it can't overpower the set lighting. You want this to be complicated and interesting looking, but you have to control how much it pulls the eye, because you don't want to compete with the cast. There's always compromises involved, and fundamentally, you're always looking for that sweet spot as best as you can, with the limited resources, with the limited information, and with the limited amount of time you have.
Denise, as you developed within this industry, were there points where you suddenly had like a big eureka moment, like, oh, I should be doing it this way, or any big jumps or changes in how you worked?
I was very impressed at the speed in which production happened. I mean, as a nurse, I was part of a team, but it was very, very different. I think the aha moment was the fact that this needed to be done on schedule and budget, and that was something that was a bit different. Also, Michael put me in charge of, made me video coordinator for Star Trek Deep Space Nine, because we had 24-frame video for the first time on monitors in those sets. And that was an organizational job, and I was very used to being organized as a nurse and then in my own life. So, but that was another switch, so to speak. I divided my time between working in the art department in graphic design, but I was also organizing the video and working on set to make sure that the right image went on the right screen for the right scene.
And that's one of those things that sounds really easy. Like, of course you're in red alert here, but in fact someone has to laboriously track every screen in every scene and know when the cue occurs. And Denise did all those things, and I would see her working incredibly hard, but the final result on film looks completely effortless. But that's because of hard work.
So, for either of you, is there anything special about the way you do your work compared to other people who do the same kind of work?
Well, I think the huge advantage that we have is we're married, and Michael was my boss. Of course, at work, we weren't a married couple. He was my boss, and I think the reason it worked is because I respect him, and I respect his knowledge and his direction. So I didn't have a problem with it. If he told me to do something, even if I didn't agree with it, I did it. He's my boss. Where if we come home, that kind of the roles are reversed. But we didn't have any problems working together. A lot of people say, wasn't that hard to do? And I said, absolutely not. It was great. And also because at 3:00 in the morning, we could talk about things that are happening the next day in production if we were both awake. So I thought it was an advantage.
Also, Denise is very, very tolerant, so I was very lucky there. One very small thing, with computers, it's if you devise an alien written language, it's actually very easy to program your alien font into the computer, so you can type in the alien language. And a lot of people like to do that, and that's really fun. You can write something and have it make sense in the alien language. But I don't like to do that. I've had designers working for me who like to do that, and I say, please don't. And the reason is that if you do that and then you type it in, you type it in on your screen or into your graphic, at a certain point, if you step back, if you see it in the background, it's going to be you're going to write like English. It's going to be broken up into it's going to be in horizontal lines, broken up into small groups of characters. It's probably going to be organized in paragraphs. So as you step back and look at it, no matter how clever the character design is, as it gets a little fuzzy, it's going to look like English, and I think that's a disservice. So what I've always tried to do is, as much as possible, and you can't always do this, but as much as possible, I tried to give each alien written language a different visual grammar, so that even if you can't resolve the characters, the way that they flow together on screen is different. So that helps, I hope, helps you believe that it's an alien language. And that's I'm not saying that anyone who does it differently is wrong. I'm just saying that that's what I do, and I know it's different from what some people do.
So what are there artists or imagery or anything that you've drawn inspiration from for graphic design? Or
my hero in terms of graphic designer was an American graphic designer named Saul Bass. If you know the name, he's one of the great icons of 20th century graphic design. He did a lot of. He was a filmmaker. He did some amazing titles sequences for such directors as Alfred Hitchcock. But he also was a pioneer of the discipline that is known as corporate identity design. That is the use of graphics and logos and consistent typography to help an organization, help a company convey its image, its core values to its customers and to its employees. And I have always felt very strongly that a fictional organization like the Federation of Starfleet or the Federation itself, it would do the same thing. So I tried to bring that discipline to Star Trek, so that the Federation would have a logo, then it would be consistent and it would be throughout its use. That Starfleet would have a fairly consistent style for its emblems and its signage and all those things. Now we did change it up for each successive show, but within each show we tried to be pretty consistent, and I think that helped.
Yeah. So Denise, any inspirations in the art world or design world?
My inspiration was Michael.
Okay.
In life itself, I like not cluttered, simple lines, and that was very much in keeping with Michael's style. So, since he was my teacher, I think I probably absorbed that philosophy.
Okay. Now you both have worked on, remastering the original series, and you've done the history books, the reference books. Have you seen what have you seen as far as the change in style across the decades of Star Trek? Anything minute that people might not be aware of?
Well, I'm sure people are well aware of it, but Star Trek has always been on the cutting edge of production and visual effects technology. That is, you might look at the original series and think, well, it's kind of quaint, but in fact, for the way you made television and film in the 60s, that was pretty cutting edge. That was bleeding edge. They used optical effects, and they used color television and all these kinds of things. Similarly, the Star Trek films made use of more advanced construction techniques. They took huge advantage of computer motion control, visual effects photography. In Next Generation, it went on and on, and I think it's fascinating to see that each new Star Trek reinvents itself based on what's available at the time. How far can they push the envelope of what's possible with the current tools? And I think that's helped keep Star Trek fresh.
Yeah, but then you get people complain, like with Discovery, they're like, "Oh, it looks too fancy compared to what we saw in the original series."
Well, both Discovery and the Abrams films, they had a really interesting challenge, and one of them was you needed to strike a balance between what came before, but at the same time, their assignment was to freshen things up. Their assignment was to change things. And, would I have done things differently? Probably, yeah. I would have made different choices, but then different people might not have liked my choices.
Right, yeah. Denise, anything as far as changes you've seen, anything additional?
I think it's very interesting that it seems to me the less money you have for a production, the more creative you have to be. If you look at the original series, they had no money, and they had to pick a style that was consistent. And Matt Jeffries, the art director, went with not state-of-the-art technology, which is levers and switches and so forth that you'd see in Mission Control for Project Gemini, Apollo, etc. He looked at okay, what can I design that is consistent, and he picked a style that were these little resin buttons, and he picked that there was a logic to that. And if you watch original series, it holds up because it's not dated. It doesn't stay there. And I think that, like I said, the less money you have, the more creativity you have. When you have tons of money and you have tons of choices, it sometimes can get cluttered and over the top.
Nick Meyer very famously said, and I think it's entirely correct, art thrives in the presence of limitation.
Yeah. So if you didn't have limitations, if you could choose any sets of technologies available to do, graphics and design and special effects, anything through the ages, what would you like to use, in sci-fi or Star Trek?
Everything comes from the story. So I first will always try to look at what's the story, what's the setting, what's the emotional impact you're trying to have, and I will generally try to convey that. It's not. I always. I often used to say to people, it's not the tool. It's not whether you're using CG or models or what. It's not the tool. It's not the brush. It's the hand driving the tool. So it's. I almost don't care what the technology is. Almost don't care what the technique is. It's what do you do with it?
Now, Denise.
I think what Michael said, but I also think it's really important to have an idea of what you're creating and what is its function. I think that I get very disoriented when I look at a set on any show, and I can't figure out what it's supposed to do. If I walk in and I see all these flashing lights and blinking things, and well, what does that panel do? Then that bothers me.
So what in science fiction, or fantasy have inspired you apart from Star Trek?
2001: A Space Odyssey.
Okay. That's Michael.
Mission Control in Houston.
Yeah. Yes. Off audio, I heard that you're really into NASA and you have a special dish to get feeds. And
Oh, yeah. Well, we used to, but now we just have DirecTV.
That was a C-band.
Oh, that's right.
That was a C-band. Now we just have DirecTV.
Okay. So what, is there anything specific in NASA imagery that really pulls you in? I know it's all cool, but are there elements that you really like?
Look at the design of the Apollo lunar module. On one hand, it's this incredibly clunky, goofy, strange, counterintuitive design. But if you look at it, it's an astonishingly elegant solution to a very complex engineering problem. It's these people figured out how they were going to land on the moon, and then they designed and built a machine that was incredibly efficient to do exactly that in exactly that way. There's not an ounce wasted on that thing. It was never going to fly in the atmosphere, so it didn't need streamlining. It was going to operate under these particular conditions of gravity and acceleration, so they didn't need seats for the astronauts. The astronauts needed to be able to see these areas on the surface during approach and landing, and so they built windows that exactly gave them the field of view that they needed. And it's such a work of genius that once you understand what it's doing, it's incredibly beautiful.
Have you ever had a design element suggested to you, or someone suggested something be taken out that you felt strongly opposed to that suggestion? Either something that shouldn't be on a ship because it doesn't make sense, or...
When you're working in filmmaking, it is a team effort, and you're working for someone. So if a producer or a director says, "I don't want that control panel to be there. I'm going to stage the shot so that character is standing there. I want that to be there." That's what you do because you're serving the story, you're serving the storytelling. And there certainly are people who will go, "Well, no, I have the artistic integrity that I'm going to refuse that because that's simply wrong, and I'm not going to. I think that's crazy. It's we're there to help tell a story, and certainly, if I disagree, and I think the person making that decision is wrong, I'll say, "Look, there's a good reason for this." And sometimes they'll say, "Yes, you're right, let's change it." And sometimes they'll say, "You're right," or "I see what you're saying, but do it anyway." And you respect the filmmaker. You respect them as an artist as well as you respect the chain of command. There are times. I had a couple of times when Roddenberry asked me to do things that I thought was nuts. But Gene Roddenberry, he was a serious creator, so that's what you want. I'll explain to you why I think you're wrong. And if he still wants me to do it, I'm happy to do it. I'm genuinely happy to do what he wanted.
So, Denise, I want to ask about the big Christie's auction of Star Trek artifacts and such. Going through all that stuff, did you have any moments where you seeing all this stuff, did you see something in it, like a theme or obviously Star Trek theme, but was there anything that you discovered going through all that stuff?
Yes. We found, in the original series, they used these tiny embroidered Some of them had were like rectangle shaped as their medals. You saw it in like court martial. You've seen it when they were wearing their dress uniforms. We found a bunch of those in a plastic bag in the bottom of a cardboard box. Probably hadn't seen the light of day in 40 years, or people didn't know what it was, but of course we knew what it was. We discovered that. Discovered Dee Kelly's spacesuit from the Tholian Web underneath a bunch of Voyager costumes, and I knew exactly what it was, immediately what it was. Those are really the two that come to mind of unexpected things. We found the necklace from the Kolinar sequence in Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I'm sure there were many other things. I can't think of anything off the top, Mike.
There was a box that we found that had this beat up Enterprise model kit model from the movie Enterprise, and someone had taken quite a bit of effort to paint it and detail it, but it was beat up, you know. And I looked at it and I'm going, what was this from? And I finally realized, oh, this was filmed as a miniature of the Enterprise for distant shots in Star Trek II. So this was a film screen used model, and I thought, well, that's cool. But then I took it out and I'm handling it very carefully because it's really fragile, and you know the engines are falling off. So I put it down carefully. Then I realized, you know, like a customs inspector finding a false bottom in a suitcase, I realized there was a false bottom at the bottom of the case. I took it out, and underneath it, in a second compartment, was a model of the Reliant. So, and both of them had been used as filming miniatures in Star Trek II. So I was thrilled that I discovered it, because I hope the person who bought it appreciates it, because that's such a cool artifact.
Were there anything you found that you were said to yourself, oh, that's how they did that? You know, any kind of costume or prop that just something that didn't make sense how it was done? We we worked alongside with costume designers like Bill Tice and Bob Blackman, but you know, we didn't work in costume, and there was a huge amount of it. So yeah, we're constantly going, oh my God, I had no idea the stitching was so beautiful. I remember Denise pulled out Queen Arachnia's costume from this Star Trek Voyager Captain Proton episodes, and that was so elaborate and so beautiful. I was almost afraid to touch it.
The costumes, I think, were the thing that you're doing your job, you run down to stage, you do your thing, you leave, you go back up to the art department. We saw the costumes, and they were amazing, but you never really touched them and fondled them and looked at them, and they were amazingly crafted. And I think that was the thing that really stood out, that these costumes were just beautifully made.
So a little bit of a whimsical question. Growing up, or when you were a kid, a tech device or superpower you wish you had?
Oh, wow. I don't remember. If I was the kid inside of this adult, I probably would want to fly. But a superpower, I don't know. Maybe fly.
I'm holding up my smartphone, my iPhone. This is pretty much a Star Trek device. This is the sort of thing I wish I had when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Okay, so are there any big projects that you really want to get your teeth into that you haven't done yet?
We have been incredibly lucky. We left Paramount quite a few years ago, and there's been a pretty steady trickle of interesting projects. And we never know what comes up. Just suddenly the phone will ring, and we're going to remaster Star Trek. Right now I'm working actually working on a project for Warner. It's a film called The Mule. It's directed and stars Clint Eastwood, and that's something that just almost came out of the blue. In fact, it just because suddenly they sprung it on me. I almost didn't make it to this convention because I thought I was going to have to be working on it, but fortunately they were very understanding. So, we never know what comes next, and we're always looking for the challenge. One project I'm working on is we'd like to visit. We love the beauty of national parks, and when we're there, being the sci-fi geek that I am, I like to imagine, what would it be like if this was an alien planet and there was a ring system that's reflected in that lake. And so what I've started to do is, as a personal project, it's a series of art prints where I take photographs that I've taken at, say,
Death Valley.
Death Valley National Park or Yosemite, and I'll take the photograph, but then I'll retouch it. I'll process it, and then I'll put a rocket ship in there, or I'll put a planet in the sky and make it look to bring out the beauty of the actual natural landscape, but then to give it a sci-fi context.
You've probably seen the NASA travel, the planetary travel
Yes,
posters.
they do a wonderful job.
So, Denise, any?
It's really interesting. Not many people can say all their dreams have come true.
Yeah.
All my dreams have come true. I'm not kidding. So anything that comes from now is bonus.
Yeah.
And Mike and I have gotten to a point where we just want to have fun. So if we're offered a job and it sounds like fun, we'll take it. If it sounds like it's not going to be fun, we might pass. So, there's a surprise, things that we never thought we'd be doing. And so, like Michael said, the phone will ring and we'll get a new job, and it's been a real adventure.
Where can people find your books and the stuff you've worked on, or any of your stuff?
A lot of it's on Amazon. Unfortunately, our most recent book, the 2016 Star Trek Encyclopedia, is completely sold out.
Wow.
And,
well done.
Well, thank you.
But it makes us sad because people are asking where can we get it, and we say secondary market because, and we have no control over that. I mean, HarperCollins was the publisher, and they've told us it's sold out. Are you going to republish? We don't know.
We can't get a straight answer.
We can't get a straight answer. We have no idea.
Right.
I will plug very strongly, even though we don't get a penny off the sales, very strongly, and you can get it on Amazon, I think they still have it, is the Blu-ray, the Roddenberry Vault. That is our passion project. I think it's probably one of the most important and most important thing we've ever done. And it's the original series clips that ended up on the cutting room floor, and Rod Roddenberry saved the film, and we crafted documentaries to kind of support the footage, and we're very proud of it, and we want every single Star Trek fan, especially if you're an original series fan, to check it out.
One question I want to hit, I forgot, what element of your work do you enjoy the most?
I enjoy looking at something and finding some ingenious way of encapsulating it and into something that symbolizes whatever concept you're trying to convey. For example, when we did Star Trek Next Generation, being a huge fan of Matt Jeffries, I quite frankly wanted to make the Enterprise D instrumentation. I pretty much just wanted to copy Matt Jeffries. And Gene came up to me and said specifically, I don't want you to do that. I want you to show that technology has advanced so far since Kirk's day that it's become simple. And I'm going, oh God, how do I do that but yet keep it interesting? And I came up with the Next Generation control panel graphic design, and that was fun because it was come up with something that's familiar but very different. And anyway, I'm very proud of that.
Probably something along the lines with Mike said, something that is simple and not cluttered and tells a story.
Okay, cool. Well, that's all the questions I have. Any last words?
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. One of the best ways in which you can provide feedback for this podcast is to rate me on iTunes. Please give me a good rating if you like this, or feel free to give me a bad rating if you didn't, and I'll use that feedback to hopefully make this a better podcast. You can also follow me on Instagram under Chris Alvarez Sci-Fi, on Facebook under Chris Alvarez WLC, on YouTube under Chris Alvarez WLC, and on Twitter under Chris Alvarez WLC. You can also get more information on my website, chrisalvarez.com. Please remember my name Chris does not have an H, so it's ChrisAlvarez.com. Thanks for listening, and keep imagining the future.